No can do.
The film opens with Jack, a former CIA officer who has traded covert missions for a respectable civilian career on Wall Street. He now spends his days navigating New York's financial world, though it quickly becomes clear that the quieter life has never truly suited him. Far away, a field operative slips inside a heavily secured building after entering a code into an electronic keypad. Once through the door, he moves rapidly from room to room, checking every corner with practiced precision. His operation appears to be going according to plan until an urgent message comes through his earpiece. Crown is on his way upstairs. Knowing he has only seconds left, the operative rushes toward a laptop and begins transferring its files. Before the download can finish, security guards discover him and immediately start shooting. He returns fire and pushes through the resistance, refusing to abandon the transfer. Despite the bullets tearing through the room, he manages to retrieve the information at the very last moment. But the escape plan falls apart almost immediately. Crown gains access to the communication channel and addresses Nigel personally. Whatever extraction route had been arranged for him is no longer available, leaving Nigel isolated inside enemy territory with nowhere safe to go. Back in New York, Jack makes his way through the crowded city streets. Traffic surrounds him, pedestrians hurry past, and a vehicle suddenly brakes hard nearby. Not long afterward, Mike, the CIA's deputy director, locates Jack inside a bookstore. Jack tries to lighten the mood by joking that the agency has finally decided to kidnap him. Mike does not play along. He has come for a serious reason, and Jack can tell almost immediately that this is not a casual reunion. During their conversation, Jack admits that his new civilian routine has left him restless. The work pays well and looks impressive from the outside, but it gives him none of the purpose he once felt in the field. Mike presses the issue, clearly sensing that Jack misses his previous life more than he is willing to admit. Jack also brings up Kathy, revealing that the two of them separated shortly after Christmas. The breakup has only added to his sense that something important is missing. Mike claims he is not asking Jack to return to full-time operations. According to him, the assignment is straightforward. Jack only needs to travel to Dubai, meet a contact named Nigel, and collect surveillance material obtained during a joint operation with M6. Jack immediately refuses, though his continued questions expose his curiosity. He wants to know what was taken, why Nigel cannot deliver it through normal channels, and why the agency needs him specifically. Realizing Jack may need an extra push, Mike introduces the man assigned to accompany him. The contractor steps forward and casually introduces himself as Mike November. His relaxed attitude contrasts sharply with Jack's suspicion. After some hesitation, Jack finally agrees to make the trip. Mike sweetens the deal by arranging first-class seats for both men. Later, Jack and Mike November settle into the luxury cabin while champagne is served. November warns Jack not to be fooled by the simplicity of the briefing. In his experience, there is no such thing as an easy package retrieval. Something always goes wrong. He also stresses that no one can be allowed to track them once they land in Dubai. Jack reminds him that his position at the hedge fund is legitimate. It is not an invented identity or a temporary cover story. November barely listens. Rather than debating Jack's employment, he turns his attention toward charming the flight attendant. After their arrival in the Dubai region, Jack briefly returns to the role of financial professional. During a business meeting, one of his colleagues asks him to share his assessment with the room. Jack explains that political transitions and newly emerging regimes often produce unpredictable market instability, making the current environment especially dangerous. Arya, one of the people present, jokes about Jack's mysterious background and his rumored history as a spy. Her teasing makes it obvious that she still suspects there is more to him than his Wall Street resume suggests. She invites him to join her for dinner, but Jack turns her down. He already has somewhere else to be. Jack soon leaves with Mike November to meet the contact. Along the way, November admits that his motivation for accepting the assignment is mostly financial. He needs the payment and does not pretend otherwise. Before separating from Jack, November gives him an earpiece and explains that he will remain close enough to guide him. Jack must approach the contact alone, so the meeting does not attract unnecessary attention. Through the earpiece, November reminds Jack to act naturally and avoid staring at anyone for too long. Jack enters a crowded marketplace filled with vendors, customers, and constant movement. After scanning the area, he identifies the man he has been sent to meet. The contact is visibly nervous. The moment Jack approaches, the man demands proof of who he is. Jack explains that Greer sent him and that he is only there to carry the information out. Instead of calming down, the man becomes even more suspicious. His eyes dart around the market as though danger could appear from any direction. He begins questioning Jack aggressively, convinced that the meeting may be a trap. At the same time, November warns Jack through the comms that someone appears to be following him. The contact reacts badly when Jack mentions Greer. He accuses Jack of secretly working for Crown and refuses to believe his explanation. Jack lowers his voice and tries to prevent the frightened man from causing a scene, but the situation is already slipping beyond his control. The contact demands to know why Greer did not come personally. Jack repeats that Greer sent him because he is there to help. The man laughs bitterly at that idea. According to him, Greer is the one who needs saving. November hears the conversation deteriorating and orders both of them to stop moving. Before Jack can respond, the contact suddenly runs. As he flees, he warns Jack that Greer has every reason to be afraid. Jack takes off after him, forcing his way through the crowded market and toward the waterfront. The chase continues onto a raft positioned beside the dock. Before Jack can reach the contact, another man attacks him from behind and locks an arm around his throat. Jack struggles for air as the attacker tries to choke him unconscious. Jack fights desperately, using every bit of leverage he can find. After a brutal struggle, he breaks free, but the attacker escapes aboard the raft. Jack falls into the water during the confrontation. He claws his way back toward the dock and pulls himself onto solid ground, coughing and gasping for breath. Refusing to let the man disappear, Jack continues the pursuit. He eventually corners the attacker near the docks and grabs him, demanding to know who sent him and what Crown wants. Before the man can answer, a muffled gunshot cuts through the air. Mike November has fired a suppressed round, killing the attacker instantly. Jack is furious. He wants to search the body and determine whether the man is carrying anything useful, but November refuses to remain at the scene. Police sirens are already drawing closer, and staying even a few seconds longer could get them both arrested. November pulls Jack away, and the two escape in a vehicle as emergency sirens approach from behind. At CIA headquarters, Greer, Jack's former superior, repeatedly attempts to reach him. Jack does not answer. With no way to confirm whether the Dubai operation succeeded, Greer is left to carry the pressure alone. Then his phone rings. Crown is on the other end. He wastes no time pretending the call is anything other than a threat. Crown demands that Jack return whatever Nigel took from him. Greer claims he has no idea what Crown is talking about. Crown does not believe him. He makes it clear that he will locate Jack personally if necessary, and should Jack remain out of reach, Greer will be the one forced to suffer the consequences. Later, Jack and Mike November arrive at a safe house in Dubai. Jack immediately begins venting about everything that went wrong, from the dead contact to November shooting the only attacker who might have provided answers. November tells him to stop talking. Moments later, Spear, a local intelligence officer, enters the safe house. She sits across from Jack and calmly explains how serious his position has become. From the perspective of local authorities, Jack is now the leading suspect in two separate deaths. His presence at both scenes, combined with his unexplained movements, makes him look guilty. Jack argues that he has influential allies who can clear up the misunderstanding. He believes Greer, and the CIA will intervene before the situation gets worse. Spear challenges that assumption. She asks Jack whether he is certain Greer is actually trying to protect him. Jack insists that Greer can be trusted, but Spear has evidence suggesting otherwise. She produces a photograph of the man Greer supposedly killed in Karachi and places it in front of Jack. According to the official version, the victim was stabbed, yet the photograph reveals no visible stab wounds anywhere on the body. Spear explains that an experienced interrogator can inflict extreme pain without leaving obvious external injuries. When torture is performed correctly, the corpse can appear surprisingly clean. That means Greer's account of what happened in Karachi was false, and for the first time, Jack is forced to consider that the man he trusts may be hiding far more than he ever admitted. Jack can barely process what he has just heard. His expression shifts from disbelief to anger as Spear watches him closely. She asks whether the name Starling means anything to him. Jack shakes his head. He has never encountered it before. Spear explains that Starling was a covert operations unit created by Greer and Nigel in the aftermath of September 11. The team existed beyond normal oversight, carrying out missions that could never be officially acknowledged. Its members operated without conventional limits, eliminating targets across the world and leaving behind a staggering number of casualties. For years, the operation remained buried. Eventually, investigators began getting too close. Questions were raised, records surfaced, and the entire program came dangerously close to public exposure. When the pressure became impossible to contain, Greer accepted the blame by himself. He allowed his own career and reputation to be destroyed while keeping the identities of the others hidden. Among the people he protected were Nigel and Crown. Spear makes it clear that Jack is now caught in the middle of something far larger than a failed intelligence pickup. She gives him a simple choice: cooperate with her investigation or face the full consequences of the two killings linked to him. Jack understands that it is not really a choice at all. Sometime later, Greer arrives at a British intelligence facility, where Spear confronts him about his recent activities. She knows he had been secretly monitoring Nigel before the operation collapsed. Greer denies having any hidden agenda. He claims he was not spying on Nigel, but keeping watch over him because he believed Nigel might be in danger. Spear does not appear convinced. Greer then demands that Jack be brought in. He wants Jack to question him personally, rather than relying on second-hand accusations. Before Jack enters the interrogation room, Mike November pulls him aside and gives him a warning. Whatever anger Jack is carrying, he cannot afford to destroy Greer completely. Burning him now could eliminate one of the only sources capable of explaining what Crown is planning. Jack enters anyway, already furious. Greer attempts to apologize, but Jack has no interest in hearing it. He cannot believe that Greer kept the existence of Starling hidden from him, especially after using him to retrieve Nigel's stolen intelligence. Greer places several photographs on the table. The first shows Whittaker. The second is Wilkes, Both men were former intelligence operatives who once worked under Nigel. Greer explains that Crown has revived Starling, transforming the abandoned unit into an unofficial rogue program operating for his own purposes. Jack's anger erupts. He accuses Greer of dragging an ordinary civilian into the middle of a conflict that Greer himself helped create. Jack had left the agency, built a legitimate career, and tried to move on. Yet Greer sent him directly into a war zone without revealing what he was truly walking into. To Jack, it is not merely reckless. It is a betrayal. He tells Greer that the entire situation is a disgrace, both to him personally and to the country he once claimed to serve. Greer refuses to accept the accusation quietly. He reminds Jack that resigning from the CIA does not automatically make him morally superior. Walking away from the institution does not erase the compromises Jack made while he was part of it. Greer defends the original purpose of Starling. In his view, the unit was not created out of cruelty or ambition. It was formed because conventional rules could not always stop immediate threats. He calls its creation a matter of practical judgment. Every target they removed, Greer argues, prevented innocent people from dying. The missions were ugly, but according to him, the alternative would have been worse. Jack does not back down. He tells Greer that people like him always speak about acceptable losses as though those losses are abstract. Jack knows differently because he considers himself one of them. He gave everything to the fight. He sacrificed his career, relationships, peace of mind, and the life he might have had. When he finally came home, there was almost nothing waiting for him. Greer tells him that this is exactly why he cannot stop. The people who survive these wars often return feeling discarded, angry, and directionless. Greer warns that when trained soldiers are abandoned and left without purpose, some of them eventually become the same kind of threat they were once sent to destroy. Jack looks at him and asks the question Greer has been avoiding. What truly separates Greer from Crown? For once, Greer has no confident response. After a long silence, he admits that he is no longer certain. Then he tells Jack that perhaps the answer is Jack himself. Jack still questions orders. He still recognizes lines that should not be crossed. His conscience remains intact, even after everything he has endured. According to Greer, Jack's moral judgment may be the only real distinction left between them. Later, Spear gathers the team for a formal intelligence briefing in Dubai. Claudia, a signals analysis specialist, presents the information recovered from the man who attacked Nigel's contact. The files contain surveillance images from several locations, including photographs of central London and remote mountain regions near Kabul. Greer studies the material and immediately recognizes the pattern. He has seen this operation before. 2 decades earlier, he prevented a nearly identical bombing plot. The similarities are too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Greer contacts Wright and tells her she needs to reach London without delay. Jack believes the intended target is Tower Bridge. He insists that the area must be closed and secured before the attackers can act. Wright is skeptical. The available intelligence is fragmented, incomplete, and possibly manipulated. She questions whether they have enough evidence to shut down one of London's most recognizable landmarks. Greer tells her that Crown is behind the operation. He also reveals that Crown is the man who brought Starling back from the dead. Wright is stunned. The possibility seems almost impossible to accept. Greer then explains the history between them. Years earlier, he and Crown had worked together while pursuing the PMN, a dangerous network connected to an imminent terrorist strike. During that mission, Crown captured a Pakistani deputy intelligence chief and kept him alive for questioning. The interrogation produced critical information. Using that intelligence, Greer's team located the planned attack and prevented the bomb from exploding with only 3 hours remaining before detonation. At the time, the mission appeared to be a success. Now Greer believes Crown has recreated the same scenario, except this time he is not attempting to save the country. He wants to punish it. Back in the present, Greer tells Wright that Crown feels betrayed by the nation he once served. In Crown's mind, the government used him, abandoned him, and then erased everything he sacrificed. That resentment has hardened into revenge. Greer warns her that Crown is no longer motivated by duty or ideology. He is willing to go as far as necessary to make his former country suffer. Elsewhere, Jack meets Emma, who speaks briefly about Nigel and what he gave up to protect the stolen intelligence. She then admits that she secretly planted a listening device inside Jack's jacket. She has been tracking his conversations and movements since the operation began. Jack is understandably irritated, but Emma defends the decision. She tells him that trust cannot simply be assumed in their line of work. It must be earned, tested, and proven. Only when everyone's loyalty is clear can they be certain they are working toward the same objective. Before Jack can respond, Mike November notices movement on the surveillance feed. He alerts the rest of the team. Jack tells him not to lose sight of the target. At a nearby military installation, Wright meets Greer in person. Despite the urgency surrounding them, she greets him warmly, suggesting the two share a long professional history. Meanwhile, armed British police storm a suspected terrorist location in London. Officers force their way inside, secure the building, and take the primary suspect alive. Wright refers to the arrested man as the tip of the spear, believing he may be the first visible piece of Crown's larger network. Jack contacts Greer directly from the raid location with urgent news. The police have discovered a huge quantity of explosives inside the building. There is enough material to cause catastrophic damage to Tower Bridge. Emma questions the suspect's explanation and quickly dismisses his cover story. Nothing he says matches the evidence found at the scene. However, Jack becomes increasingly uneasy. The suspect was too easy to locate. The explosives were left almost completely exposed, with no serious protection and no attempt to move them before the raid. To Jack, that makes no sense. No experienced operator would abandon that much firepower without guards unless the discovery itself was part of the plan. Greer urges Jack to keep searching the building. There may be additional evidence hidden inside that can explain the contradiction. Jack looks around, mentally reconstructing everything that has happened. Then the pieces suddenly connect. He asks Greer a terrifying question. What if Crown wanted them to find the explosives? Jack realizes that the entire Tower Bridge threat may be a diversion. Crown planted enough evidence to force British intelligence, armed police, and CIA personnel to redirect their attention toward the raid. Their forces have been deliberately pulled away from somewhere else. Jack urgently warns Greer that Crown has manipulated them. Tower Bridge is not the real target. Greer is. Jack shouts for Elizabeth, trying to warn her, but his voice comes too late. A massive explosion rips through the street. The blast tears through vehicles, windows, and surrounding structures. People are thrown off their feet as debris rains across the area. Smoke and dust swallow the road, sending terrified civilians running in every direction. Jack hears the explosion through the call and repeatedly shouts Greer's name, but there is no response. Mike November receives the first field report. Greer has gone down. Marlowe, an officer with British intelligence, speeds southwest through London toward Leadenhall. She radios dispatch while driving, giving her current position and requesting updates from the blast site. At the center of the destruction, Greer lies injured among broken glass and scattered rubble. The explosion has left his ears ringing. The surrounding voices sound distant and distorted, as though he is trapped underwater. Barely conscious, Greer opens his eyes and stares upward through the smoke. At the same time, Jack spots Crown's escaping vehicle. He races after it, cutting through London traffic and refusing to let the man disappear. Jack repeatedly calls for support, but no one answers. Communications are overloaded, units have been scattered, and every available team appears focused on the explosion. Jack knows he may be the only person close enough to stop Crown. He accelerates, weaving between cars as the pursuit grows more dangerous. Crown's vehicle pushes deeper into the city, forcing Jack to take greater risks to keep it in sight. The chase reaches Horse Guards, where Jack swings into the opposite lane and drives directly into oncoming traffic. Horns blare and vehicles swerve around him, but Jack never slows down. After everything Crown has done, he is not allowing him to escape again. Mike November comes through the comms and tells Jack to cut through the tunnel. Jack follows the instruction, accelerating as bullets strike the vehicle around them. Rounds spark off the metal bodywork and crack against the windows, but they continue closing the distance. Ahead, Jack finally sees Crown's car. Crown's driver pushes recklessly through the streets, tearing into a crowded area near a church. Terrified pedestrians scatter as the vehicle forces its way through them without slowing. Jack raises his weapon and fires toward the car. He shouts for Crown to stop, but Crown does not even acknowledge him. A moment later, gunmen inside Crown's vehicle return fire. Jack is forced behind cover as bullets tear into everything around him, leaving him pinned with no safe angle to shoot back. He tries to return fire anyway. Then his weapon clicks. The magazine is empty. With no ammunition and nowhere to move, Jack is left completely exposed. Just as the shooters prepare to finish him, Mike November arrives. He opens fire on Crown's men, forcing them to duck and giving Jack enough protection to escape the kill zone. Mike rushes over and checks him for injuries. Jack says he is physically fine, but then reveals what has happened. Wright is dead. To Jack, that loss already makes the cost of the operation unbearable. The situation unravels further when Jack reaches Greer and confirms that Wright did not survive the blast. Emma warns them that police units are rapidly approaching their position. They have only moments before the area is surrounded. Jack insists that Greer must be moved immediately. With Wright gone, Greer is now serving as the acting director of the CIA, which makes him both an essential asset and an even larger target. The group gets him out before the authorities arrive. Later, a formal military funeral is held in Wright's honor. Her coffin is carried with full ceremony as colleagues, soldiers, and intelligence officials gather to remember her service. The atmosphere is heavy, made worse by the knowledge that her death was not an accident but part of Crown's calculated plan. Greer finishes a phone call nearby, visibly struggling to hold himself together. Jack approaches and tells him there was nothing anyone could have done. Crown designed the attack carefully, and by the time they understood the real target, it was already too late. Greer does not find much comfort in that. He describes Wright as the one source of light in a world that had become increasingly dark. She represented something decent in an institution built around secrets, violence, and compromise. Now that light is gone. After the funeral, Emma takes the team to Abingdon, an abandoned Royal Air Force base that has been removed from active service. The isolated facility gives them somewhere secure to operate without drawing attention from Crown, British intelligence, or anyone else who may be watching. Colonel Jones, a longtime family friend Emma trusts completely, takes control of the base and locks the site down. Once everyone is gathered, Jack reconstructs Crown's operation from the very beginning. He explains that Crown planted fabricated intelligence because he knew MI6 would respond exactly as expected. Every clue was designed to push the agencies in a particular direction. The supposed Tower Bridge attack, the exposed explosives, the arrested suspect, and the London raid were all pieces of the same manipulation. Crown did not merely anticipate their reaction, he directed it. Jack believes even the attack on Wright and Greer was arranged from the start. Emma examines the gunmen involved in the ambush and identifies them as former members of a Russian organization that officially no longer exists. The group was believed to have been dismantled years earlier. Jack recognizes the significance immediately. That Russian organization was among the many networks Starling once targeted and destroyed. Crown is rebuilding threats that Starling previously eliminated, then unleashing them to create chaos. His goal is to prove that the world has become more dangerous since Starling was shut down. Every attack supports the same argument. Without operatives like Crown working beyond the rules, governments cannot keep their citizens safe. Greer then reveals another secret. Nigel had not simply stumbled onto Crown's operation. Greer had personally placed him inside it as an undercover source. Nigel was infiltrating Crown's organization on Greer's orders. Mike November turns to Greer and reminds him that Wright's death has changed the power structure. Whether Greer wants the responsibility or not, he is now the director of the CIA. Jack sees another possibility. Crown may have wanted Greer elevated to that position. If Crown believes he can pressure, manipulate, or control Greer, then killing Wright may have been about more than revenge. It may have been an attempt to install a director who could eventually restore Starling. Before they can explore the theory, Colonel Jones enters carrying a package. It was delivered specifically for Greer. Everyone becomes cautious as Greer opens it. Inside is an object carrying a hidden message, and the information reveals where Crown wants to meet. The team traces him to a busy public square in London. Greer arrives and finds Crown waiting among the crowds, confident and completely unafraid. The moment Crown sees him, he mocks Greer for still trying to play the hero after everything they have done together. He wastes no time asking about Nigel. Crown wants to know exactly what information Nigel gathered while operating inside his organization. He demands that Greer return whatever Nigel stole. Crown argues that Starling's people were never the villains governments later claimed they were. According to him, they protected the world while politicians and officials hid behind regulations. They carried out the missions no one else had the courage to authorize. Greer rejects the justification. He tells Crown that the old enemies Starling once hunted are no longer the greatest danger. Crown is. Of all the threats they have ever faced, Greer believes Crown is now the one person who must be removed. Crown responds by warning Greer that he is hardly innocent. Wright's death and the growing list of casualties now belong to Greer as much as they belong to anyone else. Crown tells him he will spend the rest of his life surrounded by the ghosts of those he failed to save. The accusation pushes Greer over the edge. He suddenly lunges toward Crown. Jack immediately shouts at him to stop. Crown does not flinch. He remains perfectly calm, showing no fear or hesitation as Greer is pulled back. He makes his true objective clear. Crown wants Greer to use his new authority as CIA director to restore the old covert system. He wants Starling reborn with official protection, operating once again beyond public oversight. Jack steps forward before Greer can respond. He claims Nigel's stolen intelligence is in his possession. For the first time, Crown turns his full attention toward him. Crown, the most dangerous opponent Jack has ever confronted, asks where the material is and orders him to return it. Jack lies. He says the files were left behind in Dubai and can be delivered once they return there. Crown considers the offer, then agrees. He withdraws into the crowd and disappears into the darkness, apparently satisfied that Jack will lead him to the missing intelligence. Once Crown is gone, Greer immediately confronts Jack. He knows Jack does not have the files. Jack admits the claim was a bluff. He needed to give Crown a reason to delay whatever attack he is preparing and keep him focused on recovering the stolen data. That buys them time. Jack also believes they have misunderstood how Nigel collected the information. Nigel was being hunted and knew he could be searched or killed at any moment. It would have been too dangerous for him to carry the evidence physically. Instead, he must have transmitted it somewhere. Their next task is to discover where he sent it. Emma takes them to a private apartment located above a small pub. The pub's owner, Arthur, knows Emma and recognizes the significance of her visit. He gives her a key that once belonged to her father. Emma leads the others upstairs and uses the key to open a concealed room Nigel had kept hidden. Inside, they find an old computer that was never connected to ordinary online networks. Jack starts the machine and begins searching. At first, there is nothing useful. The computer contains no visible messages, operation reports, or intelligence files. Most of what they find consists of personal photographs and fragments of Nigel's private life. Then Emma notices a music track stored among the files. The audio begins playing unexpectedly. Jack realizes it is not simply a song. The file is hiding a connection path. After digging deeper, he discovers that Nigel had been using the external server of an online chess platform. The chess site gave him a discrete location outside Crown's direct network where he could monitor live communications. Nigel had been watching Crown's operational transmissions through that server. Jack contacts Patrick, a trusted technology specialist who may be able to trace where the transmissions originated. Patrick agrees to examine the network activity and tells Jack to forward everything they have recovered. As the investigation continues, another detail falls into place. Jack remembers Crown's operational nickname, Blonde Ambition. He connects the phrase to Nigel's hidden apartment, realizing the flat may have been referenced somewhere in Crown's communications. Jack asks Emma how many people know this location exists. She tells him almost no one. Even Spear was unaware that Nigel maintained a secret room above the pub. That means the location may still be secure. Mike November considers the situation and presents the others with the harsh reality. Without Nigel's intelligence, they have no way to predict Crown's next move. Another attack is coming, and they may not be able to stop it in time. Mike suggests that trying to expose or arrest Crown may no longer be realistic. The most direct solution is to kill him. Jack understands the reasoning, though he is not ready to accept it without exhausting every other option. He takes a moment to thank Mike for staying with them despite the danger. Mike could have walked away after the Dubai operation, but instead he continued following Jack deeper into the conflict. Mike responds with unusual honesty. He tells Jack that men like them do not have ordinary relationships. The work damages friendships, careers, and families until almost nothing remains. In the end, the people who fight beside them may be the only family they will ever truly have. For Mike, that family consists of Jack, Greer, and himself. Before the conversation can continue, Patrick calls back. He has found something. Greer takes the phone and demands an immediate update, but Emma interrupts and claims the investigation led nowhere. She tells Greer the server was a dead end. The lie is deliberate. Jack does not want Greer fully involved until they know whether Crown is controlling or monitoring him. Privately, Jack explains what Patrick actually discovered. Nigel's secret server appears to connect directly to the source of Crown's entire operational network. If they can complete the data transfer, they may uncover every active cell, target, and communication channel Crown controls. That is why Crown moved so aggressively in Dubai. Nigel was attempting to transmit the information when the operation collapsed, and Crown was desperate to prevent the upload from finishing. Jack proposes repeating Nigel's attempt. They will reconnect to the server and complete the transfer themselves. Elsewhere, one of Crown's operatives, Truckin, watches Greer leave the area. He immediately reports Greer's movement to Crown. Crown orders him to stay close. From that moment forward, Truckin is to follow Greer wherever he goes and report every person he meets. Emma arrives on a motorcycle and pulls up beside Jack, ready to take him to the departure point. At the same time, Greer verifies that Mike November is still committed to the operation. Mike confirms he is not backing out and boards the aircraft with the rest of the assembled team. Before takeoff, Greer contacts Colonel Jones. His tone is unusually respectful, acknowledging the help Jones has provided and the risk he is taking by supporting an unofficial mission. Emma checks in with the others and confirms that arrangements have been made with Emirati intelligence. Their local contact will provide transportation and escort them once they reach Dubai. As the team moves into position, the political consequences of their plan begin to surface. Emma contacts the group again to confirm that everyone is on the way. She explains that Emirati officers will accompany them through the city and help ensure they reach the target area safely. Spear reacts with immediate anger. She insists that the team has no authority to conduct another operation in Dubai. After the deaths, the failed extraction, and the diplomatic damage already caused, allowing foreign intelligence personnel to return with weapons could trigger an international crisis. Emma calmly argues that the Emiratis are not participating in the mission itself. Officially, they are only providing an escort. Spear recognizes the technical distinction, but she clearly does not trust it. Elsewhere, one of Crown's operatives learns that the team has secured assistance from an Emirati intelligence contact. He quickly reports the development to Crown. Crown remains completely unconcerned. He dismisses the local support as irrelevant, convinced that no escort will be enough to protect Jack once his people close in. After arriving in Dubai, Marlowe meets Jamal Ali, the Emirati officer assigned to assist them. Jamal greets the team and informs them that transportation is already waiting. He leads them toward a line of vehicles prepared for immediate departure. While the others load their equipment, Jack contacts Patrick and asks for an update on the modem signal. Patrick continues tracing the hidden connection Nigel used to access Crown's network. After narrowing the transmission path, he determines that the signal is coming from somewhere near Dubai Marina. Back at intelligence headquarters, Spear demands live satellite coverage of the area. She wants every available camera redirected toward the marina immediately. Jamal explains that Dubai operates one of the most extensive surveillance systems in the region. Cameras, facial recognition platforms, and traffic monitoring technology cover most major areas of the city. He claims the network is so advanced that authorities can often identify criminal activity before an incident has fully unfolded. Meanwhile, Greer's aircraft begins descending toward the region. As the ground team studies the building connected to the signal, Emma estimates that Crown may have between 5 and 10 armed men stationed inside. Jamal agrees to assist them as far as he legally can. However, he reminds Emma that Emirati officers cannot take part in a foreign intelligence assault without official authorization. Their current role is limited to transportation and protection. Then Jamal mentions a possible exception. Should the situation develop into a direct threat against Emirati national security, his team would have the legal authority to intervene. Emma smiles as soon as she understands what he is suggesting. If they need Emirati forces involved, they simply have to ensure Crown's men create an incident serious enough to qualify as a national security emergency. Inside the vehicle, Jack opens his laptop and prepares to establish the connection with Crown's server. Everything depends on completing the transfer Nigel started. Jack takes a slow breath, steadies himself, and begins the transmission. Before the upload can progress, Crown's guards spot the approaching team. Gunfire suddenly erupts from the left. Bullets hammer the vehicles and shatter nearby glass as everyone dives for cover. The carefully controlled approach instantly turns into a chaotic firefight. Mike November pushes forward through the broken entrance, firing at the men blocking their route. Glass cracks beneath his boots as he moves from one position to another, clearing the path with precise bursts. After eliminating the immediate threat, Mike calls out that the area is secure. Both he and Jack are breathing heavily. Jack looks around at the damage and curses under his breath. He believes Crown anticipated their arrival because of something he missed. Once again, he blames himself for leading the team directly into an ambush. Emma checks the surrounding streets and confirms they are temporarily clear. The group climbs back into the vehicle, and the driver accelerates away before more of Crown's men can arrive. But the operation continues to deteriorate. Once inside the target building, Jack orders the team to separate. A single group would be too easy to trap, so they divide across different corridors and entry points. Almost immediately, gunmen positioned on the upper levels begin firing down at them. Rounds tear through railings and walls while the team scrambles for protection. Emma checks the signal tracker and confirms that the modem source is located several floors above them. With the elevators too exposed, she and Jack head for the stairs. They race upward as gunfire echoes throughout the building. When they finally reach the correct floor, they discover that the corridor is blocked by a reinforced security door. The electronic lock will not respond, and they do not have time to bypass it quietly. Mike steps forward and plants an explosive charge. The blast tears the door from its frame, opening a path into the secured section. Beyond it, they locate the room housing Crown's servers. Mike searches the surrounding area for another entry point, while Jack and Emma remain behind cover. He eventually finds a service access door at the rear of the server room. Rather than waste time attempting to unlock it, he attaches another charge and detonates it. The rear entrance blows inward. Jack immediately connects Patrick to the server system. From his remote location, Patrick begins navigating Crown's encrypted network. Layer by layer, he breaks through the security barriers and starts copying everything stored inside. The download contains Crown's operational structure, communication routes, financial links, agent identities, and active mission data. For the first time, they have access to the full network. Then Crown arrives. A helicopter approaches the building, its rotors thundering above the marina as it closes in on their position. Crown contacts Jack directly through the communication channel. His voice is calm and mocking. He taunts Jack for believing he could enter Dubai, steal the network, and leave alive. Jack ignores the provocation and orders everyone to prepare for immediate extraction. Before the team can move, Crown's fighters reach the corridor outside the server room. One of them throws a grenade through the breached entrance. The explosive lands only a few feet away. Jack barely has time to react before it detonates. The blast throws him across the room and slams him against the floor. Smoke fills the air, alarms begin sounding, and fragments of equipment rain down around him. Through the confusion, Patrick shouts over the comms. The download has finished. They have the entire network. Mike realizes the main corridor is no longer usable. Crown's men are closing in from the front, and the room will soon become a death trap. He places explosives against the rear wall. The charge detonates, tearing open an emergency escape route through the back of the building. Mike directs Emma and Jack toward the opening. They climb through the damaged wall and begin making their way out, carrying the recovered data with them. Nigel's mission is finally complete. Crown's network now belongs to them. Jack urges Emma to keep moving. Staying inside the building even a few seconds longer could allow Crown's men to surround them. Then a gunshot cracks through the air. Emma jerks violently and falls. Jack drops beside her and sees blood spreading from a serious wound. He presses his hands against it, desperately trying to slow the bleeding. He tells Emma to stay awake and keep breathing, even as her strength begins to fade. Before Jack can move her, Crown appears. He approaches with complete confidence, looking down at Jack as he struggles to keep Emma alive. Crown mocks him for risking everything in Greer's name. He asks whether Jack truly intends to die for a man who deceived him, used him, and dragged him back into a war he had already escaped. Then Crown asks whether Jack plans to spend his final moments fighting. Jack looks up and tells him that this confrontation was always part of the plan. Crown's confidence finally shifts. Jack was never simply trying to outrun him. He was keeping Crown fixed in one location. Above them, Greer authorizes a helicopter strike against Crown's position. The aircraft closes in and opens fire, tearing through the area around Crown and cutting off every possible route of escape. The attack devastates Crown's remaining forces. As the operation reaches its conclusion, Greer later gives formal testimony about the events. He speaks openly about institutions that claim to defend truth while being built upon secrecy and deception. He acknowledges that intelligence agencies often survive by hiding their mistakes and asking others to bear the consequences. But Greer also says that institutions alone are not what preserve a country. Real hope comes from the people willing to confront those lies, accept the danger, and continue fighting even when the system fails them. Crown survives the strike but is left wounded, trapped, and unable to escape. Jack approaches him with his weapon drawn. Crown tells him to finish it. Jack hesitates. Despite everything Crown has done, Jack understands that pulling the trigger would mean crossing the same line Greer once crossed with Starling. Crown sees the uncertainty and begins provoking him. He challenges Jack to shoot, daring him to prove that his morality disappears the moment revenge becomes personal. Jack keeps the weapon trained on him, but does not immediately fire. The choice now belongs entirely to him. In the aftermath, Greer meets with the president and recommends Jack for the position of deputy director of the CIA. He argues that Jack possesses what the agency needs most: Field experience, intelligence, independence, and the courage to challenge orders when they become morally indefensible. Later, Jack approaches Wright and pulls her aside for a private conversation. Outside, Emma continues recovering from the gunshot wound she received in Dubai. Although she is still healing, she is back on her feet. When Jack joins her, the two exchange a few quiet jokes about everything they have survived. Emma reminds him that she once said trust had to be earned. Jack asks whether he has finally earned hers. She avoids giving him a completely direct answer, but her expression makes the truth obvious. Their relationship has changed. They are no longer temporary allies forced together by circumstances. They now understand where the other person's loyalty lies. Greer meets Jack one last time before the transition becomes official. He asks whether Jack is all right after everything that happened. Jack says he is fine, although he admits something still bothers him. Greer was right. Jack never truly belonged behind a desk on Wall Street. No matter how hard he tried to build a normal life, part of him was still searching for a mission worth accepting. A helicopter passes above the Dubai skyline as the city stretches beneath it. Sometime later, Jack walks through a government building toward an important meeting. For someone who has faced assassins, explosions, and international conspiracies, he looks surprisingly nervous. Greer notices and asks why he appears so uneasy. Jack does not get the chance to answer. The doors open. He steps into the room, prepared to formally begin his new position as Deputy Director of the CIA. Before Jack enters, Greer offers him one final assurance. Whatever comes next, Jack will not face it alone. The reaction to Jack Ryan, Ghost War, is all over the place, and honestly, I understand why. For some viewers, this is easily the weakest thing connected to the series. Not just disappointing, but the kind of disappointment that stings a little more because the earlier seasons built up so much goodwill. People went into this expecting a proper continuation, something tense, intelligent, maybe a little complicated, and instead came away wondering how the same characters ended up inside such a basic action movie. Then you have the completely opposite reaction. Some people watched it, had a good time, enjoyed the shootouts, liked seeing the old cast together again, and moved on with their evening perfectly satisfied. No anger, no feeling of betrayal. Just 2 hours of familiar faces, international locations, car chases, and gunfire. For that audience, the movie does exactly what it needs to do, and I think that difference comes down to what you expect from Jack Ryan. If you press play wanting a serious espionage thriller, this movie can feel painfully shallow. The story is easy to predict. The twists are barely twists, and there are moments where the logic falls apart almost immediately. You start asking questions the film clearly does not want you to ask. After a while, that becomes distracting because Jack Ryan is supposed to belong in stories where intelligence matters. You expect the plot to stay one step ahead of you, or at least make you feel like the characters are dealing with something complicated. Here, the movie often seems more interested in getting everyone to the next chase. But if you are approaching it as a simple streaming action film, the weaknesses become easier to forgive. The pace is quick, the production looks expensive, and there is usually something happening. It is not demanding. You do not need to keep track of 20 different political motivations or remember a conversation from 40 minutes earlier. Everything is placed right in front of you. That can either feel convenient or incredibly disappointing. Personally, I found myself somewhere in the middle. I never thought it was completely unwatchable. There are entertaining moments, and the returning actors bring enough familiarity to stop the whole thing from feeling empty. Seeing Jack, Greer, and November together again does help. There is a comfort to it, especially if you spent several seasons with these characters. At the same time, familiarity is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Take away the Jack Ryan name, remove the connection to the series, and I am not sure this film would create much conversation at all. It would probably arrive on streaming, sit in the action category for a few weeks, and become one of those movies people half-watch while eating dinner or checking their phones. That sounds harsher than I mean it to, because there is definitely an audience for that kind of movie. Sometimes you genuinely do want something easy, something you can watch on a quiet evening without studying every detail. A film where the good guys are easy to identify, the villains are clearly bad, and the action keeps things moving. The problem is that Jack Ryan has usually promised more than that. That is why the low ratings do not surprise me, but neither do the positive reviews. Both reactions make sense. The people calling it terrible are measuring it against the series, the books, and earlier adaptations that gave the character more depth. The people defending it are judging it as a modern action thriller that is polished, fast, and reasonably entertaining. Those are two very different standards, and the film sits awkwardly between them. It is too connected to the series to be judged as just another random action movie, but it is not rich enough to satisfy viewers who wanted another proper Jack Ryan story. It looks like the same world. It brings back the same people. It has the same international movement and government conspiracy setup. Yet something about it feels lighter, thinner, almost like a version of Jack Ryan, designed for people who do not really want to think about Jack Ryan. That may be exactly why some viewers enjoyed it. There is no homework involved, no complicated web of relationships, no slow political buildup, just a straightforward mission, plenty of danger, and a clean ending. For me, that makes Ghost War watchable, but not especially memorable. I can understand someone calling it a fun Sunday night movie. I can also understand a longtime fan finishing it and feeling like the franchise deserved a stronger conclusion. Both opinions can be true, because this is the kind of film that gives you entertainment on the surface while constantly reminding you how much better it could have been underneath. So is it the disaster some reviews make it out to be? Probably not. Is it one of the best Jack Ryan stories? Not even close. It lands somewhere in that frustrating middle ground, polished enough to watch, familiar enough to enjoy in places, but far too ordinary to leave much of an impact once the credits roll. The biggest problem Ghost War has is that it does not arrive on a blank slate. People already know this version of Jack Ryan. They watched him across several seasons, followed the relationships, got used to the slower political buildup, and saw how the show could take its time with a threat before finally letting everything explode. So when this movie showed up, expectations were naturally high. Maybe too high, but not unfairly high. The series created those expectations itself. At its best, Jack Ryan was not just about gunfire or someone running through a foreign city with an earpiece. It had room to breathe. A suspicious conversation could sit there for a while. A minor detail could come back later and actually matter. Characters were allowed to develop beyond whatever job they had in the plot. Even when the story became unrealistic, there was usually enough tension and intelligence around it to keep you involved. The movie does not have that luxury, and you can feel it almost immediately. Everything moves faster, but not necessarily better. Information gets dropped into conversations, characters make decisions quickly, and the story pushes ahead before you have had much time to care about what just happened. It feels like the film assumes your connection to the series will fill in the missing weight. Sometimes it does. Seeing familiar faces return creates an instant sense of comfort. You already understand the history between Jack, Greer, and November, so the movie does not need to build that from scratch. There is something enjoyable about watching them fall back into old rhythms. A look or a joke carries more meaning because you remember where these people have been. But that same familiarity also makes the weaker parts stand out. You remember how much sharper the dialogue used to feel. You remember when Jack solved problems by noticing something other people missed, rather than simply arriving at the next action scene. You remember threats that unfolded gradually and villains who felt connected to a wider political situation. Here, a lot of that has been reduced to quick explanations and broad motivations. That is where the disappointment starts. It is not only being compared with the television series, either. Jack Ryan comes with decades of baggage. Films like Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger gave audiences a version of this world that felt serious, tense, and grounded, even when the situations became cinematic. Those stories understood that Jack was most interesting when he seemed slightly out of place in the danger around him. He was not supposed to be the loudest person in the room. He was the one thinking while everyone else was reaching for a weapon. That distinction matters because without it, Jack Ryan starts blending into every other action franchise. The movie may have the locations, the agency briefings, the covert operations, and all the usual espionage decoration, but the specific flavor of the character becomes harder to find, and longtime fans notice that immediately. A new viewer might watch this and think it is a decent spy action film. There is nothing wrong with that reaction, but someone who has spent years with the books, earlier films, or the series is probably looking for a certain kind of tension. Not just danger, but the feeling that intelligence and judgment are driving the story. Ghost War often replaces that feeling with momentum. Things happen quickly. People move from one country to another. There are attacks, betrayals, briefings, and chases. The movie keeps presenting the shape of a Jack Ryan story, but the depth underneath that shape feels thinner than before. This is probably why some viewers were so much harsher than others. They were not simply judging the film in isolation. They were comparing it with the version already living in their heads. The earlier seasons had built a world where these characters felt settled and where the political material had time to develop. The movie asks the audience to accept a faster, simpler version of all that. For some people, that adjustment is easy. For others, it feels like a downgrade. I found myself constantly thinking about what the story might have looked like as another season. Maybe the villain would have had more room to become interesting. Maybe Greer and November would have received actual arcs instead of being moved into position when needed. Maybe the conspiracy would have felt less like a collection of familiar ideas and more like something carefully constructed. That does not mean longer is automatically better. Television can drag things out too. But this particular story seems to need more space than the movie gives it, and once you start comparing it with the strongest Jack Ryan material, the gap becomes hard to ignore. The production is polished. The cast knows these characters. The film understands the visual language of the series, yet it rarely captures the same confidence in its storytelling. It looks connected to what came before, but it does not always feel connected. That is the frustrating part. Nobody expected a perfect adaptation. Most viewers probably would have accepted a simple, entertaining continuation. But when a franchise has already shown that it can deliver layered espionage, strong relationships, and patient suspense, a basic action movie feels like less than it should. Ghost War is not only competing with other films released around it, it is competing with its own history, and that may be the one battle it was never going to win. The easiest way to describe Ghost War is that it feels like two episodes of the show stitched together and released as a movie. Not a disaster, not completely cheap, just oddly shaped. It has the same cast, the same general look, the same international locations, and the same kind of government conspiracy the series has used before. On the surface, everything is familiar. You could pause it halfway through, come back the next night, and it would honestly feel like you had finished one episode and started another. That is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of fans wanted more time with this version of Jack Ryan, and the movie gives them that. Krasinski is back, Greer is back, November is back, and the whole thing has the comfort of returning to a show you already know. There is very little adjustment required. The movie drops you into the world and expects you to keep up. The problem is that a film needs a slightly different kind of energy. It needs to feel like an event. There should be some sense that the story was important enough, large enough, or emotionally strong enough to justify moving from television to a feature-length format. Ghost War never really creates that feeling. It plays like another mission. A fairly busy mission, sure, but still something that could have easily been divided into episodes and placed inside another season. Even the structure has that television rhythm. There is an opening incident, a briefing, a few separate investigations, some international travel, an escalation, and then a large action sequence at the end. It is all arranged competently, but it does not have the shape of a story built specifically for cinema. It feels like the filmmakers took the familiar ingredients of the series, increased the budget slightly, and removed the episode breaks. You can almost sense where those breaks would have been. There are scenes that feel like mini cliffhangers, followed by sudden changes of location or tone. Characters disappear for stretches, then re-enter the plot exactly when they are needed. Certain developments seem important for 10 minutes and then quietly fade into the background. In a season, that kind of structure can work because there is time to return to those threads. Here, there is nowhere to return to. The movie keeps moving because it has to reach the ending before the runtime runs out. That creates a strange experience where the plot feels both rushed and stretched. Some ideas are introduced too quickly, while other scenes continue longer than they need to. It is as though the story was originally designed to breathe across several hours, then compressed without fully rebuilding the pacing. That is why the film can look expensive and still feel small. The locations are impressive. The vehicles, weapons, and set pieces all suggest a serious production budget. Nothing about it looks like a low-level television special. But scale is not only about money. It is also about how much weight the story carries, and Ghost War never feels especially heavy. The stakes are supposedly enormous, yet the movie treats them with the casual rhythm of another weekly assignment. Jack gets pulled back in, the team reunites, the bad guys reveal themselves, and everyone starts running through cities with guns. It is familiar enough to be comfortable, maybe too comfortable. There is also a difference between continuing a television story and turning that story into a movie. A continuation can simply give viewers more of what they already liked. A movie usually needs to justify itself with something new. A stronger emotional conflict, a more memorable villain, a shift in the character, some kind of finality. This one seems uncertain about what it wants to be. At times, it feels like a farewell to Krasinski's version of Jack Ryan. The returning cast and the emphasis on their history suggest a closing chapter. Then other moments feel like setup for another movie or even another series. It ends neatly enough, but not with the impact of a genuine conclusion. That uncertainty makes the whole project feel slightly temporary, like something produced because the franchise was still valuable and the cast was available. For viewers who loved the show, that may be enough. There is a real pleasure in seeing these characters together again, especially after spending several seasons with them. The movie does not need to rebuild their chemistry because the audience brings that history into every scene. But that also means new viewers are getting a thinner experience. Without the emotional background of the series, Greer and November can feel less like fully developed characters and more like reliable teammates who arrive when the plot needs extra help. Jack's relationships with them matter because of earlier seasons, not because this film does much to deepen them. That is another reason it struggles to stand alone. A proper movie should ideally work even for someone entering the story for the first time. Ghost War can be followed without watching the series, but following the plot and feeling invested in it are different things. The emotional value mostly comes from recognition. You are happy to see these people because you already know them. The film depends on that, and once you notice it, the bigger budget becomes almost beside the point. The explosions are larger, the streets are busier, and the action has a little more polish, but the storytelling still feels built for television. Not the best kind of television, either. More like a mid-season two-parter, designed to keep the audience entertained before the main story continues. Except there may not be a main story after this. That is what makes the film feel so strange. It could be the ending of an era, but it does not carry the emotional weight of an ending. It could be the beginning of a new phase, but it does not introduce enough fresh material to feel like a beginning. So it sits in the middle, a long episode pretending to be a movie. There is enough here for fans to enjoy. The cast is familiar, the action is frequent, and the production is polished. But as a feature film, it never quite becomes more than an extension of what came before. It is not cinematic because the screen is wider or the budget is larger. It is cinematic when the story feels like it had to be a movie. And this one never really does. The story in Ghost War is not difficult to follow because it is complicated. It is difficult to follow because too much of it feels unfinished. There is a difference. The movie throws around enough spy thriller material to suggest that something large and layered is happening. Secret operations, hidden loyalties, old programs, government officials, rogue agents, data everyone wants. People traveling between Dubai and London while speaking in very serious tones. On paper, that sounds like a proper Jack Ryan conspiracy, but the film rarely gives any of it enough time to settle. A new piece of information appears, someone reacts to it, and before you have fully understood why it matters, the movie is already moving toward another location or action scene. The basic idea is usually clear. Bad people have a dangerous plan, Jack needs to stop them. The smaller connections around that idea are where things start falling apart. There were several moments where I wondered whether I had missed a scene. Maybe I looked away for a few seconds. Maybe there was a conversation earlier that explained this. Maybe one character had already established why another character could suddenly be trusted. But no. In most cases, the connection simply was not there. The movie seems to assume that speed will hide those gaps. If it keeps moving quickly enough, perhaps the audience will accept the next development before questioning the previous one. Sometimes that works. Action films do it all the time. You do not need every small detail explained when the momentum is strong and the emotional stakes are clear. The problem here is that the emotional stakes are not especially clear either. Characters talk about danger, loyalty, betrayal, sacrifice, and protecting the world, but much of it stays on the surface. We are told that certain events are deeply personal. We are told that old relationships matter. We are told that the villain's plan is connected to something larger. The film rarely makes us feel any of it. That is probably the biggest consequence of compressing this kind of story into a movie. A television season could have spent an episode showing how the organization works. Another episode could have explored the villain's past. Greer and November might have received separate storylines that eventually connected with Jack's mission. Here, those elements are squeezed into short conversations between bursts of gunfire. The result feels less like a complete story and more like the edited highlights of one. You can almost imagine the missing scenes. The villain developing his plan, Jack questioning whether he should return, Greer dealing with the consequences of bringing him back, November working through his own connection to the mission. Emma becoming more than the capable new partner introduced to keep the plot moving. There are pieces of all that, just not enough. Liam Crown is a good example. The movie clearly wants him to feel intelligent, dangerous, and ideologically driven. He is not supposed to be just another man with weapons. There is an old plan behind what he is doing, and the script gestures toward a worldview that should give the conflict some weight. But his motivation never becomes strong enough to carry the story. We understand that he is angry. We understand that he believes his actions prove something. Beyond that, his organization, his influence, and even the logic of his operation remain vague. The movie gives him the outline of a serious villain without filling in the details that would make him convincing. so he becomes another obstacle for Jack to defeat. The same thing happens with major events. The death of the CIA director should completely change the atmosphere of the film. It should create paranoia, anger, fear, and serious questions about how deeply the enemy has penetrated the system. Instead, it happens, everyone reacts briefly, and the story moves on. It feels important because of the position of the person who dies. It does not feel important because of the way the film handles the aftermath. That problem appears again and again. Betrayals arrive without enough preparation. Revelations appear without much surprise. Characters make emotional statements that do not feel supported by the scenes around them. Plot threads seem significant until the movie quietly abandons them. Even Jack's return feels strangely easy. He has left the CIA. He is now living a different life and working in the private sector. That should create tension. Why would he come back? What has changed in him? What does returning cost him? Greer asks, and Jack more or less goes. The story needs him in the mission, so he joins the mission. That kind of efficiency may keep the runtime under control, but it removes the human part of the decision. Jack does not feel pulled back into a world he tried to leave. He feels like an actor arriving for the next installment. There is also a meeting in Dubai near the end that seems connected to something larger, but the film does not give it enough context to land properly. It feels like either a leftover from a longer version of the story or setup for something that may happen later. And that is the strange feeling hanging over the entire movie. It often seems like we are watching the shortened version of a longer, possibly better story, not necessarily a masterpiece, just a story with enough space to explain itself. This is why the pacing receives such mixed reactions. Some viewers find it fast and entertaining because there is very little downtime. Others find it boring, even with constant movement, because speed is not the same as engagement. A movie can jump from chase to shootout to briefing and still feel empty. Ghost War keeps giving us events, but not always consequences. It gives us information, but not enough context. It gives us relationships, but mostly depends on what the series already established. The plot moves. The story does not always develop. That distinction becomes clearer as the movie continues. By the time the final confrontation arrives, the broad objective is obvious, but many of the details around it feel strangely distant. You know who needs to be stopped. You may not be completely sure why every earlier scene was necessary to get there. And when the ending arrives, everything is tied up quickly enough that the whole conspiracy starts to feel smaller than the film spent telling us it was. That is the frustrating part. There is enough material here for a tense espionage story. The returning characters are already established. The international setting gives the plot scale. The villain has the beginning of an interesting motive. The personal history between the team members could have added emotional weight. The movie has the ingredients. It just does not give them time to become a meal. What remains is a story that is busy without feeling rich, complicated without feeling intelligent, and fast without always feeling exciting. You can follow it, you just may not care enough to keep thinking about it once it is over. One of the hardest things to ignore in Ghost War is how familiar nearly every part of it feels, not comfortably familiar. More like you have seen the same pieces in better movies, arranged with more personality, more tension, and usually a more interesting villain. There is a rogue operative, a secret program that was supposedly buried. Government insiders who may or may not be trustworthy, hidden data, snipers, hackers, private meetings in expensive locations, a dangerous plan being carried out by former intelligence people who now believe the system has failed. None of those ideas are automatically bad. Spy thrillers have always reused certain ingredients. That is part of the genre. You expect classified files, surveillance rooms, double crosses, and someone whispering into an earpiece while another person runs through a crowded street. The problem is not that Ghost War uses familiar material. The problem is that it rarely finds a new angle on any of it. Very early on, you can start predicting where the movie is going. You know Jack will be pulled back into the field. You know the people warning him to stay away will eventually need him. You know the new threat is connected to an old operation. You know someone inside the system will either betray the team or turn out to be hiding something important. And once the villain's general motivation becomes clear, the ending is not difficult to imagine either. The film tries to create mystery around Liam Crown, but most of that mystery comes from withholding information rather than building genuine uncertainty. There is a difference between making the audience curious and simply refusing to explain what the antagonist is doing. Here, it often feels like the second one. You wait for the moment when the conspiracy will suddenly become more interesting, when one detail will reframe everything that came before. That moment never really arrives. The pieces fall into place, but they form almost exactly the picture you expected. Even the twists feel less like twists and more like scheduled plot updates. Someone reveals a hidden connection. Another character turns out to know more than they admitted. A plan that seemed finished has another layer. These things happen because spy movies are expected to have them, not because the story has carefully earned them. That makes the film feel oddly passive. You are not being pulled forward by curiosity. You are simply waiting for the movie to catch up with what you already guessed. The comparisons with Mission Impossible are especially difficult to avoid. A secret organization operating outside the system, former agents turning against the institutions that created them, a global threat wrapped in questions about control and security. It is all very close to material that franchise has already explored. Then there are the Bourne-style elements, hidden programs, government secrets, operatives shaped by an organization that later loses control of them, Jack moving through international locations while trying to uncover what powerful people have buried. At times, the movie also wants him to feel like Bond. He walks into polished locations, works alongside a tough British agent, trades dry comments, and survives action sequences that move him further away from the analyst he used to be. Put those influences together, and the film starts to feel less like a Jack Ryan story and more like a collection of borrowed spy movie memories. There is even something slightly calculated about the title. Ghost War immediately brings Ghost Protocol to mind, whether that was intentional or not. Add a plot that some viewers compared to Rogue Nation, and the resemblance becomes difficult to dismiss. That does not mean the film copies one specific movie scene for scene. It is more general than that. It borrows the mood, the machinery, and the outline of stories audiences already know. Then it adds the Jack Ryan name and hopes the familiar characters will make it feel distinct. Sometimes they do. Krasinski, Greer, and November give the movie a personality it would not have otherwise. Their shared history creates moments that feel connected to this particular series, but even then, the plot surrounding them remains strangely generic. You could replace Jack with another intelligence agent, change the names of the agencies, move the story to a different streaming platform, and most of the film would still function exactly the same way. That is never a good sign for a franchise built around a specific character. The movie also leans heavily on standard Hollywood patriotism. There are serious conversations about duty, protection, sacrifice, and the people willing to stand in the darkness so everyone else can live in the light. The film treats these speeches like major emotional moments, but they sound like things we have heard in dozens of military and intelligence thrillers before. They are broad enough to fit almost any character in almost any story about national security. One speech involving Greer is so familiar in spirit that it immediately recalls the famous confrontation from A Few Good Men. The wording is different, but the idea is recognizable. Dangerous people are necessary because ordinary society cannot protect itself. That could have been an interesting argument for the movie to explore. Instead, it is mostly used as dramatic decoration. The same is true of the villain's philosophy. He appears to believe that the world needs people like him, and that creating or exposing danger somehow proves the value of extreme protection. It sounds serious when characters discuss it, but the actual reasoning is thin. The movie gives the villain a large statement instead of a fully developed belief, and because the idea is so familiar, you can see the shape of his defeat long before the final act. There are smaller cliches everywhere too. The retired or former agent who insists he is done, then returns almost immediately. The tough new partner who must prove she can handle herself. The trusted old allies brought back for one more mission. The powerful official assassinated to show that nobody is safe. The team separated before coming together for the final battle. The villain who seems to have planned everything, except for the exact things the heroes eventually used to defeat him. Again, none of these elements ruins a film by itself. A good writer can take a familiar setup and make it feel fresh through character, dialogue, structure, or tone. Ghost War simply does not do enough of that work. It plays the familiar beats almost exactly as expected. That safety may actually help some viewers enjoy it. There is very little confusion about what kind of experience you are getting. The heroes are recognizable, the threat is clear enough, and the film moves toward an action-heavy ending without taking many risks. Sometimes predictability is relaxing. You know the good guys will survive. You know the bad guy will eventually be cornered. You know the strained friendships will hold when they matter. There is a certain comfort in that, especially for a casual streaming watch. But comfort and excitement are not the same thing. A thriller needs uncertainty. It needs the feeling that the story may turn in a direction you did not expect. Even if the ending is ultimately conventional, the journey should create doubt. Ghost War rarely does. The action may be loud, but the story is strangely quiet in terms of surprise. You are never far behind the characters. In some scenes, you are ahead of them. That weakens the suspense because you are not discovering the conspiracy alongside Jack. You are watching him work through information that already feels obvious. For a character known for intelligence, that is especially unfortunate. Jack should be noticing patterns before the audience does. He should be making connections that change how we understand the situation. His mind should be part of the excitement. Instead, the movie often gives us information plainly and moves on. There is no real pleasure in putting the pieces together because the pieces are too familiar. That is probably why the film feels so forgettable once it ends. It is polished enough while you are watching it. There are locations, vehicles, weapons, and recognizable actors. The movie keeps moving and rarely becomes completely unwatchable. But what is the one idea that belongs only to this story? What is the twist people will remember? What is the villain's defining quality? What separates this mission from the dozens of other rogue agent conspiracies already sitting in streaming libraries? The film never provides a strong answer. It is not terrible because it uses cliches. Almost every genre movie uses cliches. It becomes disappointing because it seems satisfied with them. The story takes ideas from all over the modern spy thriller landscape, but never reshapes them into something that feels fully its own. By the end, Ghost War resembles a cover version of several better films performed by characters we already like, competent in places, familiar almost everywhere, and far too predictable to leave much behind. There is a point in Ghost War where the movie stops asking you to suspend disbelief and starts asking you to switch off basic common sense. That sounds harsh, but the plot keeps creating situations that fall apart the moment you think about them for more than a few seconds. The server setup is probably the clearest example. Somewhere inside a building under construction sits a machine containing information important enough to trigger an international intelligence crisis. It has already been targeted once, yet it remains in the same unfinished location, protected by security measures that seem impressive only until somebody notices the wall beside the reinforced door. And yes, that is apparently the solution. Why crack the sophisticated security system when you can just break through the plaster next to it? It is one of those movie moments that is supposed to feel clever and practical. Instead, it makes everyone responsible for protecting the data look completely incompetent. A fortified entrance means very little when the surrounding structure can be opened like cheap packaging. The physical server itself raises even more questions. Why is this information stored in such an exposed location? Why was it not moved after the earlier intrusion? Here, too many elements seem to be performing separately. The city promotes itself. The products display themselves. The score announces itself. The action sells itself. The story struggles to connect them. So yes, Ghost War looks expensive. It sounds expensive too, usually much louder than necessary. There are impressive locations, polished cinematography, and enough international spectacle to keep the film from ever looking completely disposable. But there is a difference between production value and value. One is visible in every skyline, aircraft, phone, and luxury car. The other has to come from the story, and no amount of beautiful advertising can hide when that part is missing. So after all the arguments about the writing, the character changes, the Dubai promotion, the endless ammunition, and whether this even feels like Jack Ryan anymore, where does Ghost War actually land? For me, somewhere between disappointing and perfectly watchable, which is not the most exciting verdict, I know. It would be easier to say the film is an absolute disaster. Plenty of viewers have said exactly that, and I understand the reaction. It would also be easy to defend it as a fun, uncomplicated action movie that critics are taking far too seriously. There is some truth in that too. The frustrating part is that Ghost War sits in the middle. It does enough well that calling it completely terrible feels exaggerated, but it wastes enough potential that calling it a strong continuation feels equally generous. It looks good, the cast is familiar, the action moves. There are a few enjoyable chases, some solid shootouts, attractive locations, and moments where the chemistry between Jack, Greer, and November reminds you why people became attached to this version of the franchise. Then the characters begin explaining the conspiracy again, or someone survives something ridiculous, or another familiar spy movie idea appears without much personality, and the movie slips back into mediocrity. That is probably the most accurate word for it. Not worthless, not especially memorable, just frustratingly average for a project that had several advantages before it even began. It already had an established lead. It had popular supporting characters. It had years of audience investment. It had a large-looking budget and access to international locations. It did not need to introduce an entire world from nothing. The television series had already done that work. All the film really needed was one strong story. something focused enough for a movie, but substantial enough to justify bringing everyone back, a threat that challenged Jack intellectually. A villain whose motivation became clearer the more we learned, a personal conflict that connected with the life Jack had built across the series. Instead, the film chooses the safest possible route, another hidden operation. Another former insider, another conspiracy, another round of speeches about people working in the darkness, another collection of armed men waiting to lose a final gunfight. There is nothing wrong with familiar material when it is handled with confidence. Genre storytelling is built on familiar shapes. Most spy thrillers involve secrets, compromised agencies, betrayals, and powerful people hiding inconvenient truths. The difference comes from the details. Ghost War rarely finds enough of them. That does not mean you cannot enjoy it. The best way to watch this movie is probably at home, on a quiet evening, with expectations lowered to a very reasonable level. Do not approach it as the next great Tom Clancy adaptation. Do not expect the careful political tension of the better seasons. Do not go in looking for a puzzle that will reward close attention. Treat it as a streaming action film featuring characters you already know. Under those conditions, it works reasonably well. The production is polished enough for a large television. The plot is simple enough that missing a line of dialogue will not destroy the experience. The action arrives regularly. You can eat, check your phone for a moment, come back, and still understand that Jack is chasing the same bad people for roughly the same reasons. That may sound like an insult. It is partly an insult, but there are evenings when this is exactly the kind of movie people want. Not every viewing experience needs to demand complete concentration. Sometimes a familiar face, a car chase, and a clean victory are enough. Ghost War provides that. What it does not provide is much reason to return. I cannot imagine watching it again to catch hidden details, because there do not seem to be many hidden details. I would not revisit it for the villain, because Crown never becomes specific enough. I would not return for the twists, because most of them are visible well before the film reveals them. Even the action, while competent, rarely contains the kind of sequence people will be discussing years later. The movie passes the time, then it leaves. For casual viewers, that may be fine. For people who spent several seasons with these characters, the lack of impact is harder to accept. This could be the final chapter of John Krasinski's Jack Ryan. That possibility hangs over the whole movie, and it makes the ordinary storytelling feel even more disappointing. A final chapter does not need to kill the hero, destroy the world, or deliver an enormous emotional farewell. It just needs to feel like the story has arrived somewhere meaningful. What has Jack learned? What has he lost? What does he choose to do next? How has the man from the beginning of the series changed? The film gestures toward answers, mainly through the idea that Jack's old colleagues have become his real family, and that the intelligence world still gives him a sense of purpose. But that conclusion is not developed carefully enough. Jack does not really confront the life he left behind. Kathy's absence is barely explored. His civilian career never feels important. His decision to return is almost automatic. By the end, the movie seems to say that Jack belongs with Greer and November, fighting threats in the shadows. Maybe that is intended to be comforting. After 4 seasons, the team is still together. They still trust one another. They still answer the call. There is something satisfying in that, especially for viewers who mainly wanted a reunion. But as an ending for Jack, it feels incomplete. The character began as an analyst pulled reluctantly into danger. Over time, he became more experienced and more capable. A meaningful conclusion might have examined whether he could still separate himself from the work. Instead, the movie removes most of his outside life and makes the answer easy. Of course he comes back. There is very little left for him anywhere else. That is a sad conclusion, though the film does not seem to recognize it as one. Perhaps Ghost War is not meant to be the ending. The movie leaves enough room for another adventure. Jack is still alive, the familiar team remains available, and the franchise has not closed any door that could not be reopened with a phone call. Some viewers clearly want another film. They enjoyed the action, liked the returning cast, and see this as a solid extension of the show. For them, the transition from television to movies creates a new way to continue the character without committing to another full season. That could work. A series of Jack Ryan films is not a bad idea. The format itself is not the enemy. The problem is that future movies would need stronger writing and a clearer understanding of what makes Jack different. Simply increasing the number of locations, vehicles, and gunmen will not solve anything. The next story would need to put his mind back at the center. Let Jack discover the threat rather than receive it in a briefing. Let the political situation matter. Let the villain challenge his values rather than merely his ability to survive. Give Greer and November something to do beyond joining the final battle. and give Jack a personal life that creates real tension with the mission. Without those elements, another movie would probably repeat the same criticism: more action, less Jack Ryan. There's also the possibility of returning to television, and honestly, that may be the better option. The series format gave the stories time to build. Not every season used that time perfectly, but the space allowed for multiple perspectives, slower betrayals, political consequences, and characters who existed outside the immediate mission. A villain could become more than a name. Greer could have his own conflict. Jack could investigate instead of constantly running. Supporting characters could make decisions that did not immediately serve the central plot. That extra time suits this world. Jack Ryan's stories often depend on institutions, international relationships, financial systems, military decisions, and information that only becomes meaningful when several pieces connect. Compressing everything into 2 hours creates pressure to simplify. The conspiracy becomes a shortcut. The characters become functions. The analysis becomes exposition. The climax becomes gunfire. Another season could avoid that, though only with disciplined writing. More runtime does not automatically create depth. A weak story stretched across 8 episodes would be worse than this, but the potential is there. The television series already proved that Krasinski's version works best when Jack has time to think. A movie can still capture that, of course. Earlier Jack Ryan films did. Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger balance suspense, politics, action, and character without needing 8 hours. They also understood that Jack should not feel like the most dangerous person in every room. He becomes compelling when the danger is larger than him. Ghost War often treats him as the solution before the problem has even been explained. That weakens the story and reduces the suspense. We know Jack will return. We know he will understand enough. We know the old team will help. We know the enemy's endless gunmen will eventually miss. A future installment needs uncertainty again. Not only uncertainty about who the villain is, but uncertainty about what Jack is willing to do. Give him a decision that cannot be solved by shooting accurately. Put him in conflict with Greer over something meaningful. Let November's cynicism challenge Jack's morality. Introduce a partner who does not simply agree with the mission. Make victory cost something that remains after the final scene. Those changes could make another film worthwhile. Without them, ending here may be kinder. That is the uncomfortable question surrounding the franchise. Does Ghost War leave you wanting more because the characters still have stories to tell, or because this particular film failed to give them a satisfying ending? For me, it is mostly the second. I would like to see Krasinski receive stronger material one more time. I would like Pierce and Kelly to return for a story that uses their chemistry rather than merely displaying it. I would like Jack to feel like an analyst again, not because he should be physically helpless, but because his intelligence should shape the movie. There is still potential. The cast has not become the problem. The world has not become the problem. Even the movie format is not necessarily the problem. The writing is. That is what makes the harshest reactions understandable. Fans are not angry simply because the film has car chases or because it is less complicated than the series. They are angry because the project appears to misunderstand what people valued. They did not only like Jack Ryan because Krasinski looked convincing with a weapon. They liked the intelligence, the idealism, the discomfort, the tension between family and duty, the sense that he was an ordinary man moving through extraordinary systems and noticing the danger powerful people had missed. Ghost War keeps the name and much of the surface. The center is thinner. Casual audiences may not notice or may not care. They see a recognizable star, a polished action production, and enough movement to justify pressing play. That audience is not wrong. Movies do not have to satisfy the deepest expectations of every franchise fan. Sometimes entertainment is enough. The question is whether this particular franchise should settle for enough. Jack Ryan is surrounded by competition now. Streaming platforms are filled with spies, soldiers, assassins, former agents, lone wolf drifters, and government conspiracies. Every week seems to produce another serious man carrying a gun through an expensive location. The character needs his intelligence and humanity more than ever. Without them, he disappears into the crowd. That is what happens here. Ghost War becomes another polished streaming thriller, better looking than some, worse written than others. Easy to start, easy to finish, and easy to forget. It is not the painful endurance test some reviews describe. At least it was not for me. There are slow and clumsy scenes, but the movie moves often enough. The familiar cast provides some warmth. A few action sequences work on a basic level. I was never desperate to turn it off. I was also rarely excited to see what happened next. That is a serious problem for a thriller. The film creates noise without much anticipation. You are not leaning forward because the mystery has become irresistible. You are waiting for the next familiar beat to arrive. The villain reveals the plan. The team regroups. The cars move. The bullets start. The heroes survive. The ending wraps everything neatly enough. Nothing is offensively unresolved, but very little feels earned. Some viewers will finish satisfied because they wanted exactly that clean structure. Others will feel underwhelmed because the series trained them to expect more patience and complexity. Both reactions are reasonable. The rating probably depends less on what is actually in the film and more on what you expected to find there. As a major conclusion to the Krasinski era, it is weak. As a Tom Clancy adaptation, it lacks the intelligence and grounded tension associated with the better entries. As a continuation of the television series, it is rushed and emotionally incomplete. As a simple Sunday night action movie, it is fine. That final category is where the film is most comfortable. Fine, not thrilling, not unbearable. Not essential. There are worse ways to spend 2 hours, especially when you are already subscribed to the platform and not buying a cinema ticket. At home, the weaknesses feel less costly. You have not arranged an entire evening around the film. You can pause it, make food, adjust the volume whenever the music explodes, and continue when you are ready. The streaming context protects it. In a cinema, the thin story and extended television feeling would probably be more obvious. The scale might look impressive on a large screen, but the movie does not carry the narrative weight of an event. At home, it becomes what it probably should have admitted it was from the beginning, a bonus episode with a larger budget. Seen that way, the reunion is pleasant. Jack is back for one more mission. Greer still brings authority. November still brings personality. Emma adds a new presence. The locations look expensive. The villains lose. You finish the movie and move on. There is value in that, just not much lasting value. The people who hated it may have expected a final statement from the franchise. The people who loved it may have expected nothing beyond action and familiarity. The film rewards the second group. It disappoints the first. My own reaction falls between them because I could see the appeal while constantly noticing what was missing. A stronger script was not an impossible demand. The movie did not need to become a slow political lecture. It only needed clearer logic, better character motivation, less exposition, and action shaped around Jack's intelligence. That would have changed almost everything. The same budget would feel better spent. The same cast would feel more engaged. The same locations would feel connected to the mission rather than placed on display. The same villain might feel dangerous instead of vague. The same climax could become tense instead of simply loud. The film is not far from being decent. It is far from being distinctive. And that difference matters when the story carries a name like Jack Ryan. So would I recommend it? With conditions. Watch it when you want something undemanding. Watch it because you miss Krasinski, Pierce, and Kelly together. Watch it for the international scenery and the action rather than the espionage. Watch it at home, preferably with good popcorn and the remote close by for the sound changes. Do not watch it expecting another carefully constructed season. Do not expect a faithful return to the quieter analyst at the center of the character. Do not expect a villain or conspiracy that will stay in your mind after the credits. Under those expectations, the film can be enjoyable. Not great, enjoyable. There is an audience for that, and the positive reviews are not dishonest for recognizing it. Some viewers simply had more fun than others. They liked the pace, the spectacle, the cast, and the straightforward nature of the story. That enjoyment is valid. The negative reaction is valid too. A movie can be entertaining in the moment and still represent a major creative step down. It can contain good actors, impressive production, and effective action while remaining poorly written. Those things can exist together. They do here. That is probably the fairest final judgment. Ghost War is not one of the worst movies ever made. It is not even unwatchable. The technical quality and returning cast keep it comfortably above that level. It is simply much less than the material could have supported. A generic action thriller wearing the identity of a smarter franchise. A reunion that depends on affection built elsewhere. A possible farewell that never finds the emotional weight of goodbye. Maybe another film will follow and repair some of this. Maybe Krasinski will return for a final story that remembers Jack's intelligence, idealism, and personal life. Maybe the franchise will move back to television, where the political and character material has room to breathe. Or maybe this is the end. If it is, there are worse endings. There should have been a better one. The cast deserves that. The audience probably does too. And Jack Ryan, of all characters, should not leave us remembering how many bullets were fired. He should leave us remembering how he figured it out.